All right, Tom, thanks for your patience. I think we're ready to go.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Everyone? Yes, thumbs up. Cool. Let me just get my screen. I'll just introduce myself real quick. My name's Tom Voss. I'm a Iraq War veteran, deployed 2004 2005 to Mosul, Iraq. I was an infantry soldier, and we'll get into kind of the details around that. But this presentation that we're going to be getting into here in a moment really just is an overview around my experience going through the military and then coming home, most importantly, coming home, right? So understanding some of the challenges that I went through and how I utilized holistic practices to move through things like post-traumatic stress and moral injury, so things like nature immersion, yoga, meditation, peer support, all these really, really good supportive holistic practices. So let me just share my screen with you all and we'll get into it. Okay, here we go. Good, everyone can see? Okay.
Looks
Okay,
perfect.
Cool. Awesome. So we're going to talk about healing from post-traumatic stress and moral injury, right? And we understand that healing is a process, and it's an undertaking, but also it's an ongoing process. Again, a little bit about myself: Iraq War veteran, yoga meditation instructor, author as well. So an overview of our presentation today, a little bit about it. We're going to go over military overview. So why I joined in the first place, kind of my family history with the military, and a little bit about that. Then moving into veterans issues, trekking from Wisconsin to California, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about healing modalities and practices. So starting from the beginning here, this is both my grandfathers. Top right, my grandpa Bob. I never met him. I passed before I was born, but he served in the United States Navy, was stationed in London during World War II. And then bottom right is Claire Voss, my father's father, Marine Corps veteran, deployed to Iwo Jima, World War II. So we're going to get into a little bit more about his experience in war and kind of how we were talking about the reasons why I joined in the first place, right? He was a pretty big inspiration to me growing up. He was a judge in our community, and I didn't know too much about his military experience when he was alive, but after he passed, kind of more and more kind of unfolded. So he ended up graduating from Marquette Law School, and then ended up joining the Marine Corps and becoming a second lieutenant. I was in charge of 58 men and was deployed to Iwo Jima, right, to take the island. So this was, as you know, a historic battle. And during that time, my grandfather, for the men that he led, out of the 58 that he led, 54 were either killed or wounded in action, right? So, including him, right? So he was awarded the Navy Cross and Purple Heart for his actions on Iwo Jima, but he was also severely wounded. So his Navy Cross was awarded to him because he low crawled. His company was pinned down by machine gun fire. He low crawled to the bunker, the nest, and climbed on top and threw grenades, and then climbed over to another pillbox and destroyed that one too with C4 charges, and then was immediately hit with a mortar round right after that happened. Right, so he was severe. The whole right side of his body. He was severely wounded, and I remember growing up, my dad and my uncles would joke about how he had metal floating around in his brain. And I never really understood why, right, or why they were joking about that. But, it was to the point where they couldn't operate on him. So they just had to kind of leave it as it was. So he went through intensive therapy, rehab, about 6 months of rehab, and then came home and then started his family, after that. So my dad, my uncles, and all that. So you think about the chances of me being here are very slim, right? That if my grandfather didn't make it out of that situation, I wouldn't have been born in the first place. So it's amazing the synchronicities that happened. And the reason why he got evacuated out too was because one of his Marquette law school buddies ended up finding him wounded. And he's like, I know that. He's like, I know that name tag. And he's like, and he ended up recognizing him and rendering aid. So the amazing part about that he survived that encounter. He went on to become a pillar in our community. He was a judge, and then also volunteered for about 4 or 5 different veteran service organizations, right? So as a VFW, American Legion, and many others. So I looked up to that, right? Growing up, he was this amazing figure in our family who had these amazing experiences, but also, right, challenges, right, that come along with that. So looking at, hearing stories that he was coaching my father's 6th grade basketball team, and would get upset and throw folding chairs across the gym, right? So like that's an abnormal response to coaching kids, right? So understanding that we also have generational trauma that happens, that's passed down from generation to generation, whether that's anger or frustration, right? And this is all from unresolved trauma from war, right? So I joined the military when I was 19, right? Because I was inspired to, based on my experiences with my grandfather. And I wanted to be in the infantry. I felt like that was the thing to do. Like if I was going to do it, I wanted to be in the infantry. So that's kind of the genesis of why I ended up joining, or at least the driving force of why I ended up joining. It's in my family's lineage. And it is, it was a prominent part of our lives. So I ended up deploying to Mosul, Iraq, as part of our battalion scout sniper platoon. I was in a scout team. We operated in very small teams of 3 or 4 guys. And like, just to give you an example of some of the work that we did while we were over there, a lot of intelligence gathering, not wanting to be seen. So we were there during the first democratic elections of Iraq. So, we did overwatches for polling sites to make sure that people were able to vote. A pretty historic moment to be there. And to be able to gather intelligence without being seen. So we'd be dropped off and, we'd have 72 hours before our pickup, and we'd, sneak into a house and stay there for a couple of days without being seen, gather intelligence on what we needed to gather, and then get extracted out and then report what we've seen, right? We were also used to patrol or go on, just patrolling neighborhoods and different things like that. So we're kind of a utility platoon as well. We were used for a lot of different things, from detaining high value targets to foot patrols through neighborhoods. So this is our platoon sergeant, Brian Mack, and he ended up being killed in action during our deployment, right? He was the first of 2 that ended up being killed in action in our platoon. And what was really challenging about this experience was that it was a non-essential mission. So the mission where he was killed in action was we were taking Navy SEALs out and just giving them a tour of Mosul, right? So we, as a junior enlisted person, I was kicked off our vehicle to make room to give other people rides, right? Essentially, we're just giving them a ride around the city, just so they can understand, what they're getting themselves into, and just to get the lay of the land. So during that routine mission, they were attacked, rocket attack, and ended up taking Mac's life. So the challenge that came for me with that was that what would have happened if I was out there, right? How would it have been different if I was on that mission? Why did he end up dying? Why was I still alive? Right. So I had all these questions, internal questions. And for those of you, who haven't served, right, there's a process that happens after you lose someone from your platoon, right? So what ends up happening is they take you off of missions, which means that they basically shut your platoon down. And then you have a little ceremony for them, and then you have 1 or 2 days off. And then they, bring you into like a meeting to say, if you guys need help or support, we're here for you, kind of a thing, right? With a chaplain and a psychologist, right? No one, takes advantage of that or, has anything to say usually in those situations. But then after a day or two, you're right back out on missions, right? And you're right back to it. So you don't really have time to process the death of your friend. And for us, this was like a father figure. You have to understand that probably the median age of our platoon was 21, 22 years old, right? So I was 20 when I ended up being deployed, right? And we had guys younger than me that were there, right? 18 years old, 19 years old. So this was a father figure for us, and losing our leader was a big blow to our platoon and was really challenging. And within a few months, we lost our second soldier, Juan Solario. He was a team leader for our third team, Team 3. And again, another situation where we were, we had a choice to make, and the choice ended up being one of the routes that we were trying to take back to our base was blacked out, and it was like, imminent danger. The other one was marked with an IED on our map, right? So we had to pick your poison, right? It's like you're going to get attacked one way for sure, and then the other way, potentially you might get through unscathed. Unfortunately, the way we picked with the IED was a ambush, and ended up not making it through that ambush. So he was our second soldier that we lost within a month or two of our platoon sergeant being killed in action, right? So our platoon sergeant's replacement, the very first mission we went out with him, we were hit with a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, and he took shrapnel to his temple and ended up losing an eye, right? So we were on to our third platoon sergeant in a very short amount of time. So we experienced intense grief and loss in a very, very short amount of time during our deployment. So just to give you some examples of some of the stuff we were experiencing there, this is the aftermath of a suicide car bomb while we're on a patrol. And you can see this is a 4-lane intersection, and you can see a car burning in the background. And unfortunately, this is the case in war zones where civilians are wrong place, wrong time, and get caught in the middle of all this. So that's another aspect that you take into consideration. Not only are you trying to keep yourself alive, but you're trying to minimize as much damage around you at any given moment to try to protect civilians' life, limb, or eyesight. So this was one of the larger explosions we were in, and you can see this is the asphalt, and you can see a piece of the axle back there. We made it through this attack without anyone being injured. Had a couple of flat tires on our vehicles, and this helmet is my helmet, right? And this is the aftermath of RPG shrapnel during an ambush, and you can see it came pretty close to hitting me in the face. So I was jokingly say that, always wear your helmets, even though sometimes they don't look that great, but they do save lives, and I can say that firsthand. This, fortunately, it only knocked me out. I basically just took a seat, and I was out of commission for the day, and luckily it was like a mild concussion essentially, and I was able to kind of stay with my platoon and continue on. So we're going to get into kind of veterans issues. We're going to use a lot of my personal experiences and examples. Coming home from war was a pretty challenging experience for me. Not only are you coming out of a war zone, but you're also leaving the military, right? And I remember coming home from on leave, from my deployment and coming home and just sitting there thinking about how I felt so out of place, sitting amongst my family and friends, right? Having a nice welcome home party for me, and having people coming up to me not knowing what to say to me, right? Not knowing how to really interact, because I was going back to a war zone in a week or so, right? That was a challenging experience, I think, and I much would have rather, reflecting back on it now, I much would have rather had stayed the 12 months and just come home, a little earlier, instead of breaking the deployment up, which is pretty challenging, right? So getting out of the military too, now you have this experience of war that you can't really share. You have to understand that less than 1% of the population serves in the military, and then a smaller fraction of that are the ones that are in direct combat. So you have this unique experience where you can't really share with anyone, because no one has the shared experience with you. And when you do share it with someone, mostly they're horrified, right? So you learn pretty quickly that you can't share your experiences, and that your experiences are too much for most people, right? And I think that's why there's this kind of unspoken connection between veterans, because at least we have that understanding of what military service, and that really bonds us together. So I came home and I had this crazy experience of war, and now I'm in Wisconsin and I'm sitting on my parents' couch, and all my friends are graduating college, and I'm sitting there not knowing what I'm supposed to be doing. So I did what I thought was best, was to, get my own apartment, dive into college, get a full-time job, and just, so I just jumped back into life, right? Without even having any time to process or grieve, right, the death of my friends, or really understand how my experience of war impacted me from a physiological standpoint, and from mental, emotional, psychological standpoint as well. So obviously we always know about post-traumatic stress, and we're going to talk a little bit about moral injury, which has been around for quite a while, right? I think it was founded by a VA doctor in the 80s, working with Vietnam era veterans, right? Understanding that there's something deeper to this pain that they're experiencing, right? And we'll get into that now. So post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Mental health condition that triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. Symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event, right? The way that I like to frame this is that the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, right, like hypervigilance, alert, like the alertness that comes with that, right, that had a purpose in deployment, right? So your whole nervous system shifts to ensure that you stay alive in a dangerous situation, right? So it's like, I'm in these life or death situations, so my body adapts to that, right? So when you come back, right, from a challenging war experience or deployment or whatever it might be, right, the system doesn't know that you're out of that environment. It knows that it's been in danger for the last 12 months or whatever it might have been, right? So I like to say it's a normal response to an abnormal situation. So your body, mind, responding to being in a dangerous situation for a prolonged period of time. And then outside of the context of the military, right, this could be experiencing trauma steadily through your lifetime, right, through the youth or whatever it might be. So anytime we feel that we're in danger, right, our body responds with our nervous system, right? Looking at moral injury, so you can see it's the damage done to one's conscious or moral compass when that person witnesses or fails to prevent acts that transgress their own moral, ethical value code or conduct, right? So this is my belief is this is where we're getting into the core of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, right? So asking myself the questions, what did I participate in? Am I a good person? Can I be forgiven, right? Will my community accept me? Will my family accept me if they find out what I've experienced and what I know and what I've done? So these are some of the moral questions that end up coming up over time. So you can think of it like this: post-traumatic stress is like the nervous system conditioning to keep you alive in a dangerous situation. And then as you come home, those end up fading as you start to understand that, like, okay, like I'm not going to be attacked driving in Milwaukee, right? So one example that I ended up doing was, if I saw a trash bag on the side of the road, I would move over as many lanes as possible, because that's the conditioning that kept me alive in Mosul, right? So you see something on the side of the road, potential IED, let me get as far away from it as I can. And that was something that I would do when I first got back. But as time went on, that kind of faded away. But what ended up coming to the forefront was the moral injury, right? Could I have done more to prevent the death of my friends, right? And really these moral dilemmas, like, what did I participate in, right? Was I justified, or were we justified, right, in being in war in the first place, right? What did I participate in, right? So starting to think of and reflect on what I actually took place during the deployment ends up bringing up moral dilemmas, right? I was raised as a Catholic, so right from the beginning of my life, I understood that it's not okay to take someone else's life, right? And I was put in direct contrast to that belief system to stay alive, right? To keep myself alive. So we have these challenges, these moral dilemmas that come up in war, and we're not really talking about how they impact men and women coming home, not only on the physiological level, but also body, mind, and spirit as well. So we're looking at the challenges that come with it, right? And this is, I think it was from 2019. Over 60,000 veterans have died by suicide over the decade, right? So there's something that's inherent in war, right? The experience of war that is just detrimental to the human spirit, and we're not having that conversation, right? So I got to a point of, a pretty low point of really thinking about how am I going to take my life out of all the men that I served with. We've had three die by suicide, and then a couple others die due to health complications, right? I'm in my late 30s now, so relatively young for health complications, right? Some overdoses, things like that. So this is something that's very prevalent in the veteran community, and I'm always, kind of waiting for a phone call, expecting to hear about, one of the either someone that I know adjacent or, that has died by suicide. So it's a big problem in the community. And the only way that I believe that we can really solve this is having these kinds of conversations about the suffering that we're experiencing that is driving us to the point of wanting to take our own lives, right? So I got to the point of basically suicidal ideation, of thinking of different ways to end my own life. And I decided before that, I'm going to try, whatever I can to, before I do that, go down that road, have to try to help myself in some way. So that's the kind of genesis of Veterans Trek. And the idea came to walk from Wisconsin to California to not only decompress from my time in war, but also to bring awareness to veterans issues and post-traumatic stress, and especially moral injury. All right. So this trek was 2,700 miles, 5 months, over 7 states, right? So we went from Wisconsin to Iowa, through Nebraska. It took us a whole month to walk through the state of Nebraska, Colorado, and we went south into New Mexico, Arizona, and then across the Mojave into California. So here's a kind of an example of this is what it was for around 5 months every day. And we were really, being from Wisconsin, Wisconsin was probably the most challenging state because we knew all the mile markers and all the towns and, how far Madison is from Milwaukee and all these different, cities. So it was a grueling time, and we left in the end of summer in September. So it was also hot and humid, and we got blisters immediately, even though we tried to prepare the best that we could. Right. So we made it into Colorado, and after walking through Wisconsin, Iowa, and Nebraska, which is essentially soybean and cornfields, right? Through 3 states, it's like this. That's all we were experiencing, and then you get to the foothills here of the Rockies, and that really gave us an idea of how far we had come. Really amazing experience. And here's an example of what we would do while we were walking. And this is in the Mojave. And we would just kind of throw our sleeping bags out and, try to find a little bit of shelter the best that we could, and camp out in the evenings and stay wherever we could. There would be some times where, people would invite us in, or people would pay for a hotel room for us, or whatever we could find. Essentially, we weren't trying to be heroes and saying we're not going to accept any donations to hotel rooms or anything like that. They were very it was amazing when people would step up and support us, right? So that's, if we didn't have that support either, I don't think we would have made it across, right? Made it across. So we had a lot of support from people we didn't even know. And I think from a veteran's perspective, that really helped us build trust, because I think that's something that veterans are challenged with, is trusting people, right? You're in a combat zone, and you don't have the luxury of trusting anyone but the person to the left or the right of you, right? So everyone's kind of suspect, and you have that mentality coming home that you can't really trust, the people around you, and that ends up being detrimental to your life experience, right? Ends up isolating yourself and not really experiencing life to the fullest. So that experience of having people show up and support us was something that was really nice for us, and really nice to see that there are good people out there that want to support us and that want to support veterans issues. They just don't have the outlet or the direction, or where to donate or where to support. Right. Again, this is us cruising through Colorado, and these are some of the personal lessons that came up, while I was trekking. So first one, we talked about trust, how important trust is, right? And what's more important, I think, ultimately, is having trust in yourself. Right. And that gives you the confidence and the assurity that you are centered. Right. And I want to be able to trust myself. And if you can't trust yourself, you have nowhere to go. Right. You can't. And then you start to look towards external validation. Right. So compassion. Right. Compassion for other people. Right. But mostly like compassion for ourselves. Right. Especially when we're going through the healing process. Right. This is a slow process that demands understanding. Right. And that's how we move through these challenges, is through understanding. Once we understand what's going on, it gives us a better perspective and more clarity of the issue at hand. Right. So when there's confusion, there's stress, there's anxiety. Right. So to challenge that, we need to build understanding of ourselves. And the way that we do that is through compassion and through understanding that healing takes time, right? Again, next one, cultivating patience, especially for yourself, right? Especially when you're healing, having patience, saying that I shouldn't be a certain way, understanding that I need to accept myself as I am, right? To be able to understand, to build understanding of myself and what's going on and how I experience things. any patterns that are going on, right? So this takes a tremendous amount of patience for yourself and compassion, right? Forgiveness, right? Forgiveness is a tool that frees us from the past. So to be able to forgive oneself is something that has really helped me in my understanding of moral injury. I talked about the dilemma that I had in the beginning of not being on the mission where my platoon sergeant was killed in action, right? So this took a lot of forgiveness because I was beating myself up about a situation that was out of my control, right? And understanding that things that have happened in the past, right, we can't change. Right? There's nothing that we can do to go back to change them, right? So we have to change our understanding of the situation so that we can move on ultimately, right? And where stress and tension comes in is that we're clinging to things from the past that have impacted us, right? Whether good or bad. So forgiveness, then looking at forgiveness is a tool to help us move on from the past, right? And looking at forgiveness from a traditional standpoint too is, you don't necessarily have to forgive others that have transgressed you, right? It's more saying that if it doesn't fit, right, you have to be able to move on from that. So forgiveness is a way that can release yourself from holding on, clinging to the past, so that we can move on and continue to live our lives, continue to have new experiences, continue to evolve as a human being. And forgiveness is the beginning of that, right? But also knowing that if you can't forgive someone, you shouldn't have to, go back and forth and up and down about, how I can't do this, right? And understanding that it's like, hey, I have to have compassion, right? But like, I can't let this, I can't forgive this person or this situation or whatever it might be. So ultimately, I need to move on from it. And that can be the end, right? And just understanding that this is helping me move on, right? And ultimately, personal responsibility, right? No one's going to heal you for you, right? No one's going to do the work for you, right? So personal responsibility comes in where we have to understand that we have to take steps, right? And put the wheel into motion to be able to heal ourselves, right? It's our responsibility. It's an undertaking for sure. It's not an easy thing to do. And you talk about personal responsibility and no one wants to take, responsibility, right? But we have to when it comes to our healing. And that is something that takes some understanding as well. So I just wanted to touch quickly on some of the teachers that have impacted my life and some of the lessons that they taught me. For example, one person that's not in this presentation, but who has had an impact on me, his name was Pastor Marty. He was in the Marine Corps. We met him in Iowa. And he was in the Marine Corps, became a rancher, and then became a pastor after that. And he was one of our water points, and we set up water points along the way. So he was one of our water points. He took us out to a Chinese buffet, and we had a conversation. And in this conversation that we were having, he said that life demands a response, and you have to understand what your response is, and if you're not responding, that's a response in itself, right? So it's like action and inaction, both are choices, both are responses to situations. But life is demanding of a response, right? It doesn't stop. You can think of it like waves coming in, right? So it's like, how am I going to get myself into a position to where I can respond consciously instead of reacting unconsciously to these situations, right? And we see that with trauma and post-traumatic stress and moral injury is that we end up reacting to situations, or we'd say being triggered by situations that invoke an emotion or a feeling or sensation that is linked to the traumatic experience of the past, right? So understanding that being connected to ourselves and being understanding of what's going on, being compassionate and patient with ourselves helps us in our response to adverse and challenging situations. Secondly, we're going to talk about Wolf Walker, great guy. and we got to sit down and we got to talk about again, personal responsibility and healing, right? And no one outside of you, and this is a quote from Wolfwalker, is no one outside of you can heal you, right? And this is something that comes from within. Yes, there are people that can support, and there can people that can create containers and create the environment, but it's up to you to go to the class. It's up to you to sit down and meditate. It's up to you to journal. It's up to you to take the time to build space into your life for yourself, so you can understand yourself better, so you can understand what's going on. And Wolfwalker really highlighted that when we talked to him while we were trekking, and we met in Colorado, around Colorado Springs. So here's a cool little story about Wolfwalker here, is that, I coming out of the infantry, and I wasn't really like uber spiritual person. I was raised Catholic, so that's the only kind of reference that I had around spirituality or being connected or anything like that. So I was with Wolfwalker in Colorado, and here's a picture of him in the Aspens there. And he said, we need to do a smudging ceremony, and then I need to call in my ancestors. And I was like, kind of like, okay, I'm, kind of not rolling my eyes, but like, okay, do what you have to do, kind of mentality around it. And we did the smudging ceremony, and then he started playing his flute, which you can see here. And then within, I would say within a minute and a half, crows started landing in all the aspens around him. And I was, that was the first time I was like, wow, like this is, crazy how connected, he was just so connected to nature, right? And there was just an ease about him, and how comfortable he was in nature, in the environment, right? So another lesson from him, and how to remain grounded and centered and connected to nature as well. Right. Father Thomas Keating was a monk, right? And he spent most of his life in a hermitage in Colorado as well. And he has written a lot of books, many books. If you look up Father Thomas Keating, he has tons of books on meditation. And one of his he was one of the founding people for centering prayer, right? Which is what I basically say is meditation for Catholics, right? So if you have someone who's adverse to meditation, or isn't, really open to it, and they're have these Christian foundations, his books really put a good framework around meditation, and he calls it centering prayer, right? So I got to sit down with Father Thomas Keating and have a conversation with him about meditation and about prayer and about my experiences with war. And he had a really good story about kind of the human psyche and how resilient it is, right? And here I am kind of sitting here in front of him, just kind of a wrecked person, in the thralls of post-traumatic stress. And he says that, like, through centering prayer and through these practices, if you can find a moment of peace, just a crack of peace, right? The spirit knows that there's something beyond, the mind knows that there's something beyond the suffering that you're experiencing in that moment, right? So it only takes like a moment, right? A moment of peace to pull you out of the suffering that you're experiencing in that moment. So practices like meditation help us not only experience and feel fully what we're feeling in that moment, but they also give us an opportunity to find peace, right, in the midst of the storm that we might be experiencing at that moment. And that moment of peace is what helps us move on, right, and gives us strength to move forward, because we know that, right, the only certainty in life is change, right, and that everything is constantly changing. So when we have that moment of peace, it knows that we can go there and return there as much as we want to practice, right? And again, having great conversations. Father Thomas lived to the age of 95 and passed a couple of years ago, I think 2019. And to be able to, sit with him, he was so present and patient. and a lot of the monks that he was living with were in silence, and live their lives that way. So being in that environment and just being able to speak with him was a pretty big blessing, I think, for me as well. Sri Sri Ravi Shankar is a humanitarian, a world-renowned humanitarian meditation teacher. And I took some of his courses. And if you see the documentary Almost Sunrise that I'm featured in, you can see me going through his breath-based breathing class that he developed, right? So I was fortunate enough to go to India a few times to visit his ashram, to spend some time with him, to listen to a lot of his talks. And his practices helped really solidify my meditation practice, right? And this was my meditation practice started while I was walking across the country. I learned mantra-based meditation technique, and I would just start practicing as much as I could while I was trekking, and then slowly got into it a little bit more, to the point of where I'm like, hey, I need to really apply myself to this and be open to it, and really give it a good shot. And it was something that was helping me. And at that point, up until that point, not much was working, right? So now I had something. I'm building my tool set with breath-based meditation, mantra-based meditations, exercise, nature immersion, peer support, and we'll get into kind of these modalities here too. And this is a pretty cool experience where I got to feed his elephant, which was pretty amazing experience, right? So here's some ancient wisdom that was passed from Sri Sri, right? So we have to talk about contentment. So looking at like, what do I need in my life to be content, right? What do I need to be at peace, right? And this is what contentment is. It's like I am at peace with myself as I am, with my environment as it is, and the world as it is, right? I am content with what I have, right? If more comes to me, that's great. If whatever's leaving needs to go, right? This keeps us centered, and it is the centered path, cultivating contentment, truth. Am I being not only truthful in my words and my actions with other people, but am I being truthful to myself, or am I fooling myself, right? I have to look at myself and my experiences objectively, free of judgment, right? Because when we judge, right, we're comparing ourselves, right, to something else. So, and your judgments ended up being pulling you away from the truth of the matter sometimes, right? So am I being truthful with myself? Am I being truthful with my word, truthful with my interactions with other people, right? Again, compassion, we talked about this before, compassionate with myself and other people, giving myself the space to understand the mistakes that I've made, right? Giving myself the space to let other people make mistakes as they do, right? So being compassionate for myself and others and what's going on in my life, right? Being sincere, right? This is another one that goes in with truth. Being sincere in my word. Am I being sincere in my actions, right? And these are the things that help cultivate I think a positive vibe, energy into your system, right? And again, forgiveness, right? Forgiveness, the tool, that helps us move through these challenges from the past. This whole experience was made into a documentary film. I believe it's on YouTube, iTunes, Amazon for rent, but really gives you an idea of our experience trekking across the country, and real deep dive into moral injury and how it impacts our lives. Getting into some healing modalities that have helped support me, right? Peer support, big one. Anthony, my counterpart, walking across the country, two-time Iraq war vet. And without him, again, I don't think I would have been able to make it across the country, right? So having him with me, he deployed to Baghdad twice. I deployed to Mosul. We didn't have the same deployment experience. And we weren't trekking really for the same reasons, right? He was trekking, he wanted to be a better father and husband, and I wanted to resolve the deaths of my friends. Like, how did that impact me, right? So we were able to bounce ideas off each other, talk to each other, really go back and forth to have some good perspective and reflection on our experiences. So peer support becomes very, very helpful in the healing process. Even if the person doesn't have the exact same experience as you, similar is good enough. Someone that's able to have compassion and understanding coming from a place of non-judgment is vital for peer support. Exercise, walking across the country, walking, there's no, you're with yourself, there's nowhere to go. And you're moving, right? Which is important. Moving that stagnant energy, that is really helpful, right? Nature immersion, another big one, exercising in nature, being out in nature, walking in nature, whatever it might be. That's a great way to just kind of disconnect from all the screens and all the work, and everything like that, and reconnect to the thing that you're part of, right? Because you're a part of nature, you're not separate from it. Meditation giving you the time to be with yourself, to understand what's going on, to recharge, and to be centered, right? So this becomes really important, especially when you're healing and you're facing past experiences and trauma and stressful situations and rehashing them over and over again, right? You need to be able to have a practice to bring yourself back to center as you're processing this, right? As you're processing, it's a continuous thing. So we need to bolster ourselves and give ourselves a way to achieve deep rest in the body and the mind and the spirit. And that's what meditation ends up doing, right? And then the last one, service, right? So Sri has a saying that if you're ever having a bad day, go volunteer somewhere, right? So it kind of pulls you out of your stuff and helps you be of service to other people, right? So understanding that service can be a mechanism to help us heal, and also we're helping others, right? Which is another aspect, and I think a lot of veterans are kind of geared towards that anyways. So being of service, helping other people, really helpful in the healing process, because not only can you learn from other people, but you can share your experiences and hopefully help other people understand their experiences better, right? So here's a little bit of the transformation that I went through from September of 2013 through the trek, right? And this is August 2014. It was after my meditation workshops, right? So you can kind of see, moving through what that kind of looks like. Again, we can touch on peer support, and I'm just going to move through these just for time's sake. So we have some time. Again, exercise. This is going through our my yoga teacher training, nature immersion, right? It's really important to me. I live in Ojai, California, which is right at the base of the Los Padres National Forest. So that was something that I knew, all right, moving forward, I know I need to have access to nature, open spaces, as for my mental health, right? Meditation, big fan. Again, service and helping others, right, is very helpful. Post-traumatic growth, right? Looking at how are we learning the lessons from traumatic experiences, right? It's hard to go back and look at traumatic experiences, but if we can reframe them into what can I learn from this experience, good or bad, right? It doesn't have to always have to be a positive lesson, right? Sometimes they're not fun, right? But understanding the lesson and then saying, I need to incorporate this as wisdom, right, into my life. So maybe it's so I don't make the same mistake again, right? Or maybe it's that so I can be better in this aspect, right? Or change this behavior to have a better outcome, right? So here's a little chart. As you can see, I'll just use this real quick. So you have the level of functioning over time, right? So you have a traumatic event, so your level of functioning drops way down, right? So it can manifest in a loss of executive functioning, right? And then you start the healing process and you start to kind of revive, right? So succumbing, we talked about the suicide epidemic, and this is succumbing to a traumatic event or past experiences, right? Survival with impairment is, you hear a lot of veterans say, well, this is just how I am now, and I'm just going to live the rest of my life this way, right? And you end up going through and avoiding things in life that invoke negative, how you perceive negative responses, or triggers or whatever it might be. So you end up containing yourself in this small space and saying that, this is just the way it is, and this is how it's going to be, right? This is survival with impairment, right? And then recovery or resiliency, right, brings us back to our original baseline before we had the traumatic experience, right? So now we're back to where we're like, okay, I'm feeling the way I was before this happened, right? And then post-traumatic growth is moving above that, moving beyond that, and that's a thriving state, right? And the way that we do that is taking these traumatic lessons, incorporating them into our lives, and saying, how am I going to do that? I'm going to go this way this time. I'm going to behave this way in this time, right? And these responses, these conscious responses, help us elevate and keep going in an upward trajectory to become the best versions of ourselves that we want to be, right? And it's up to us, right? So today, again, this is just a quick overview. After going through yoga teacher training, I went out to Guam and Saipan to teach yoga and meditation to veterans there. They have a disproportionate number of veterans on Guam and Saipan, and real lack of services. So, for example, if a veteran needed services from a VA that were on Guam, they would have to fly to Hawaii. And I think there's one clinical social worker for the cluster of islands, so they're always hopping back and forth, and it's a real challenge for them to seek services, right? So I was able to go out there and teach, and you can see on the right side, these were young men that were basically in juvenile detention, right? Who have had challenges in their life. So I was able to talk about my experiences and then take them through a little practice there, which was pretty cool, right? And lastly, as I wrap this up, I just wanted to kind of drop some resources for you all to be able to experience maybe some of the things. Project Welcome Home Troops, teach the breath-based meditation. A workshop is free for veterans and their families. Vet Toga Stop Soldier Suicide is a resource center. So if you are a veteran or a family member that is advocating for a veteran, Stop Soldier Suicide hooks veterans up with a 24-month caseworker to be able to help them navigate the landmines of the veteran service organization field. There's so many organizations, so many different services. And I think a lot of veterans get discouraged after, maybe something doesn't align with them, or they have a service that didn't end up working out. They get discouraged and they stop seeking services. So this is to help prevent that, so that they can have some support while they're navigating the field, right? Team Red, White, and Blue, another good community organization, and obviously the Veterans Yoga Project, right, is a good resource, and we should utilize them as well. Again, if you want to either the audiobook or order the book, Where War Ends is kind of a more detailed memoir of my reflections, not only in war, but coming home and walking across the country, and kind of the lessons that I learned. And it's a little more raw and open and honest discussion around moral injury and dealing with the aftermath of war, right? So that's available as well. If anyone wants to ever reach out and contact or have any questions, here's my email. Feel free to send an email whenever you'd like. Happy to hear from you. And that's it. And just reflecting, on this before we open it up for Q&A, I'm grateful. It's an honor for me to be able to be here and speak with all of you, especially on Memorial Day, when we're, remembering those that have passed, and understanding that, and this is just my personal perspective, but the way to honor those that aren't with us anymore is to be live a full life. Because they don't have that opportunity anymore. So now, the torch has been passed, and, how are we going to live a life that honors ourselves and, is fulfilling and joyful and happy. And I think that's the best way that we can honor those that aren't able to be here with us today. So again, I thank you all for being here for the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Tom, first of all, thank you so much for coming. It's always an honor to hear from you. And before we just open up, we did have a question way earlier in the presentation. I want to make sure we address it. So the question was, is moral injury, essentially, I think the question was, is moral injury kind of derived from survivor's guilt?
I think that survivor's guilt is a very big part of it. So I think there are like layers to it. And you just have to keep kind of, the layers of an onion. You just have to keep peeling it back. Survivor's guilt is a big one. There's another one too around veterans who didn't deploy, right? So they feel that they didn't do everything that they could do, and they weren't given the opportunity that a lot of other veterans were to deploy. So there's, both ends of the spectrum, where you have, veterans that they feel that, I should have died instead of my friends. That's something that I had, right? And that's a mentality that's kind of drilled into you in the infantry. Is it's an honorable thing to die in battle, right? And if you're not fulfilling that duty, there's something, did I do enough, right? Why couldn't I have laid it all out on the line like my friends did, right? And then, it's just reinforced coming back into society where all those skills and everything that you have aren't really valued, and there's no real place for them. So then you kind of lose all your purpose and value, and then, it kind of snowballs from there. So I think, survivor's guilt is a big one. Not being able to accept the past for what it is another big one, right?
Thank you, Tom. There's another question in the chat that said you talked about bottling things up and saying that this, kind of understanding your symptoms as just how you are now. And a lot of vets experience that. So how do you help veterans understand what's actually happening? How do you help them get past just bottling up? Because this person said their husband does that. And I'm assuming the idea is to get them to move towards post-traumatic growth.
Yeah. So this is a hard one to answer, because there's not much you can do to help someone get to that point, right? And it's really challenging. I don't know if any of you have tried to get anyone to go to therapy before, but it's an uphill battle, right? So it has to be, you have to do some mind ninja stuff. It has to be from them, right? It has to be motivation is external, inspiration is internal. So they have to be inspired to want to heal, to want to be better. But what you can do is cultivate an environment where they feel that they're not going to be judged for their experiences, right? And being like, this is a safe place, right? And I'm here to support you when you do that. And the one way that I've done that, or have told veterans and family members to do that as well, is that acknowledging that, your veteran or loved one is suffering, right? And saying that, like, I know I'm not going to understand the experience that you went through, but I want to let you know that I'm here to support you however I can, right? And then that's just, the olive branch, and you're leaving the door open for the potential for that to happen, right? Because then they know that, like, okay, this person is going to support me regardless of what I'm going to share, whatever. And then on the veteran side, I always encourage veterans to share with their loved ones one impactful thing that they haven't shared before with them, right? So it doesn't have to be a whole story or a whole thing. It could just be one event, right, that you've kept inside, and that helps. It's a trust building exercise, right? It's saying that, like, I want to share this experience with you, right? I've been carrying it around with me, since my service or whatever it might be. I haven't told anyone about it, but I want to share it with you, right? And that can shift the whole relationship and environment greatly, right? Because it's like, if they don't know what's going on, right? They don't know the internal struggle. If they don't know why the suffering has happened, then there's no opportunity for them to be able to support, right? And I think so many times veterans feel that they need to shoulder the burden by themselves alone, on their own. But family and loved ones, in my experience, are usually open and willing to support greatly, right? But it's like there needs to be a give and a take, right? So the give is that you need to share the experiences, and the take is that I'm not going to approach this from a place of judgment, right?
Thank you, Tom. There's a comment from YouTube that a veteran with PTSD and moral injury issues has been watching and said he's going to go read your book and then reach out to you with more questions. So thanks for
cool.
providing your email. Yeah. More from the chat. Do you facilitate practices remotely? And I'm assuming you do through Oh Hi Earth. And then any suggestions to shift families' negative attitude towards someone's own diagnosis of PTS and TBI, like they might be excluding you from gatherings. So 2 different questions, one about facilitating practices and one about helping to, I guess, help your family more understand what you're going through so they don't exclude you from the family.
Right. So yes, on the practices, I do virtual stuff. So I'm taking a bit of a break right now for the summer, but there'll be, you can always just shoot me an email and say that you're interested in virtual stuff. I'm mainly focused on meditation and yoga nidra at this point, but I'm happy to chat about that as well with anyone that's interested. So the second part of that is there are layers to this, right? So it's like there's stigma around mental health in general, right? So you were approaching this with family members that might not be educated or understand about post-traumatic stress or moral injury or traumatic brain injury, right? Or TBI. These are all things you can't physically see, right? So this is the challenge, is that like, how do I express that like I'm still a person, right? And I'm like still understand what's going on. And but to people that don't understand that, well, I'm not missing a leg, so how is this person struggling, right? So it's really, from my perspective, it's an education thing, to say that I have these challenges, but I'm not broken, right? Like I'm adapting the best that I can based off these new challenges that I'm experiencing, right? So for me, it's an education thing. I don't know how receptive the family members would be to learning, but there are a lot of good books and references and different things. And maybe sitting down with them and being like, talking about being excluded is isolating, and especially with challenges of mental health, right? It doesn't help the situation. So maybe a request for support, and being like, hey, it doesn't help when I'm excluded, right? Because I have these challenges. I've also sustained a traumatic brain injury as well from shrapnel. So like I have, memory is challenging. Memory things are challenging for me sometimes, which can be frustrating for other people, right? So I understand the exclusion happens because of a lack of understanding and probably frustration from that lack of understanding, feeling like it might be just easier just to not include a person, right? So at some point I think there needs to be a conversation around that, and that is bothering you. And if it's exacerbating your mental health issues, there needs to be a conversation around how can we support ourselves better, right? And connect and communicate around this, which is an uncomfortable conversation to have, right? Especially like my parents' generation, not really used to talking about mental health issues, not used to communicating feelings, not used to communicating what's going on. So, right, and taking the lead on those to be able to speak to your needs and how people can support you better with mental health and with traumatic brain injury, right? Whether they do that or not is, we can't really say, right? But you can advocate for yourself the best that you can, and then ultimately finding peer support groups of people that can help support you, like-minded individuals, other veterans, different community organizations, right? So, sometimes as people won't understand, or they don't want to take the time to understand, which is unfortunate. Any other questions?
One in the chat just came through. How do you deal with your TBI issues?
I have to write a lot of stuff down. It's really, I think, expressing it to people, making them know that it's like, this is not a personal thing. Like, I'm not forgetting on purpose to spite you, kind of a thing, and being able to express what's going on, right? And trying to build understanding around how people are experiencing me, right? And it took a lot of like internal work to know that, like, okay, well, this is just how I have to adapt somehow as I move through this, right? So short-term memory stuff can be challenging for me. So, like, again, like, finding things to help support that, which is for me is having a notebook or something around. And the other thing is, like, out of sight, out of mind. So I have to set like alarms and stuff and reminders for myself quite a bit, to be able to like function, kind of function, right? Like, because it's like out of sight, out of mind. If it's not like in my immediate environment, it's kind of like not even a thought of it comes to. So I have to really remind myself, like, yeah, call home sometimes, like different things like that are just kind of like slip my mind a lot of the time. So really finding out what your support needs are and seeing where you need help and how do I need to fulfill those needs, which is, again, a challenging thing for veterans, because ours is always an external expression of support for supporting someone else or putting other people first, because we were taught to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good of other people, right? So we put ourselves last. And to advocate for yourself is a challenging transition, right? Because we were punished for that quite a bit, right? So if you're advocating for yourself in the military, right, you're going to be left in the plank position for 45 minutes somewhere, right? So it's going against that conditioning and saying, like, why does it feel uncomfortable for me to advocate for my needs and my own support? And that's where what we say the work is, right? Where is that discomfort coming from? I need to examine that. I need to see, why am I uncomfortable advocating for myself or asking for support or whatever it might be.
Another question in the chat. Well, just a request to speak more about Oh High Earth.
Yeah. So I started teaching just kind of regenerative practices. Oh High Earth was based off of my experience going through permaculture education, right, and regenerative practices. And as we all know, meditation, yoga are regenerative practices for the body. So I kind of put those two things together around regenerative practices for people on the planet. So looking at Yoga Nidra is a good practice to achieve deep rest in the system in a short amount of time, right? So 30, 40-minute practice, you can get deep, you can drop into deep REM cycles, right? Through that short amount of time, which gives rest to the system, balances the nervous system, right? So practices like these I wanted to offer because they've helped me so much. And then once you have an established practice, you have the tools that you need to face any kind of challenge that are coming, because the challenges continue to come, right? There's no stopping life. And like, as we said before, life demands the response. So it's my kind of belief that, the healing process isn't, I don't know, I can say that you become healed, but you become better and you become stronger and you become more resilient at taking on life challenges, right? Because when you incorporate the traumatic experiences as wisdom, you can draw on them now and say, hey, I've experienced this before, right? And this is how I moved through it last time. And now I'm going to have a different response, right? And that build strength in the system, right? And same thing, going through yoga teacher training, right? These are all deep dives into yourself so that you can understand yourself better, so you can relieve stress and trauma from the system. The whole idea, around this is like, how do I free myself from these past impressions, right? Yoga meditation, we call them samskaras. So these past impressions, right, are the things that are dictating what's going on in the present moment, whether it's avoiding certain situations or people or conversations or whatever it might be, because they are linked to a traumatic experience in the past, right? So how do we move beyond these things by letting them go, right? Tools like forgiveness, meditation, yoga, bringing a centeredness back to our system. Because when we're faced with a challenging situation, right, if we're centered, we see things clearly, we see things objectively, and we can have a proper response, right? Improper response, right? And going back to the beginning with my grandfather, chucking a folding chair across the gym because you're upset at a bunch of sixth graders, right? Not an appropriate response to the situation. It's a reaction, right? It's a trigger response. So how am I moving from a reactive place to a responsive place? And these practices just really help you establish centeredness in yourself so you can take on life's challenges, right? So you're not being just kind of thrashed around, or they say thrashed against the rocks of life, right? So, challenges will continue to come. How we respond is up to us.
Well, thank you, Tom, so much for donating your time and your expertise and telling us more about everything that you've been through and what you're going to continue to do for the veteran community. Everyone at Veterans Yoga Project, we really look up to you and we appreciate your partnership so much. And thank you to all the people here and everyone who's watching on YouTube. This is Memorial Day 2023, and in just about 45 minutes, Tom will be with us again to lead a practice during our virtual vigil. So I've put the link in the chat. Please join us if you can. It'll be spanning 3 p.m. local time for all the time zones in the continental US for the National Moment of Remembrance today. And we'll have different VYP headquarters team members there too, also holding space. But the first hour there will be with Tom. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you, Tom, so much. We really appreciate you.
Thanks so much, everyone.